In the early 2000s, Elon Musk was known primarily as a co-founder of PayPal and a figure with eccentric, sometimes grandiose ambitions. When he took over Tesla Motors, then a fledgling startup with no mass production experience, the world hardly expected a revolution. Yet Musk, a master of branding, media manipulation, and technological vision, managed to make Tesla synonymous with the future of transportation. Tesla's mission, to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, captured the global imagination. Electric vehicles, EVs, were no longer awkward, slow curiosities for environmentalists. Musk made them sleek, luxurious, and most importantly, cool. This pivot changed everything, not just for Tesla, but for the global auto industry. For over a decade, Tesla dominated the EV market with a combination of first-mover advantage, Silicon Valley flair, and a cult of personality centered around Musk himself. But history teaches that empires, corporate or national, rarely retain dominance forever. And Tesla, once the beacon of technological innovation, now stands as a symbol of a larger shift, the waning of U.S. economic hegemony and the rise of new industrial powers, particularly China. Tesla's meteoric rise. Tesla's early trajectory was a masterclass in disruption. While traditional automakers were still skeptical about EVs, Tesla released the Roadster in 2008 and then rapidly moved on to mass production with the Model S, Model X, Model 3, and Model Y. The first-mover advantage. By 2015, Tesla was producing EVs at a scale and quality that no other car manufacturer could match. Legacy automakers, Ford, GM, Toyota, lagged behind in technology and infrastructure. Tesla built its own battery factories, gigafactories, invested in proprietary software, and collected real-world driving data to refine its systems. These moves gave Tesla a tech company valuation, with investors seeing it less as an automaker and more as the Apple of cars. Musk's media genius. Much of Tesla's success hinged on Elon Musk's ability to captivate audiences. He made wild claims: self-driving cars by 2020, Mars colonization, robotaxis, that never fully materialized. But the hype translated into enormous investor confidence. Tesla's stock soared, and Musk became the richest man in the world. For a while, perception outran reality, and that was enough to dominate. Government subsidies and favorable policy. Tesla also benefited greatly from government policies aimed at promoting green energy. The U.S. federal government, as well as states like California, offered tax breaks and incentives for EVs. The European Union pushed similar agendas. Musk positioned Tesla as a solution to climate change, and governments were eager to support it. The emerging threat from China. While the Western world celebrated Tesla, Chinese firms were quietly building an alternative EV future, one that was more affordable, scalable, and nationally integrated. The rise of BYD. Build Your Dreams, BYD. Founded in 1995 as a battery manufacturer, became a serious EV player by the late 2010s. Unlike Tesla, which focused on luxury markets first, BYD targeted affordability and accessibility. The Chinese government provided subsidies, infrastructure support, and regulatory protection. Today, BYD sells more EVs globally than Tesla, and does so at lower cost and with competitive quality. Scale and infrastructure. China didn't just bet on EV companies, it built the roads, charging stations, and power grids to support them. The result? A domestic EV ecosystem that's years ahead of the West. Chinese consumers have hundreds of EV options, many of them cheaper and more advanced in terms of range and tech integration. Export domination. With its domestic market saturated, BYD and other Chinese firms began exporting aggressively. In Europe, Chinese EVs are undercutting Tesla on price and matching it in quality. In South America and Southeast Asia, Tesla is seen as a niche luxury product, while Chinese EVs are becoming the default. Tesla's strategic missteps. Tesla's decline is not purely a result of external pressure. Internal mismanagement, overpromising, and complacency have played a major role. Overdependence on Musk. Elon Musk's erratic behavior, especially on social media, has begun to hurt Tesla's brand. His acquisition of Twitter, now X, his political commentary, and his public feuds have alienated large segments of Tesla's customer base. Investors are increasingly uneasy about Musk's distraction from Tesla's core mission. Delays and quality issues. Tesla has a long history of delays. The Cybertruck was supposed to launch in 2021. The Roadster 2.0 was announced in 2017 and is still missing. Tesla's vehicles also face persistent quality control issues, from misaligned panels to software bugs. While early adopters were forgiving, mainstream consumers are less tolerant, falling behind in innovation. Ironically, Tesla is no longer seen as the most innovative EV company. BYD, NIO, and XPeng are pushing boundaries with solid-state batteries, advanced driver assistance systems, and user interfaces. Tesla's autopilot, once its crown jewel, is now mired in controversy and regulatory scrutiny. The symbolism of Tesla's fall. The decline of Tesla's dominance is more than a business story. It reflects broader geopolitical and economic trends. The U.S. no longer leads by example. Tesla's decline underscores America's decreasing ability to maintain technological leadership. Where once U.S. companies set the global standard, now Chinese firms are doing capitalism better, producing faster, cheaper, and at greater scale. A shift in global influence. In the Cold War era, American corporations were tools of soft power, symbols of innovation and wealth. Today, Tesla's fading dominance suggests that this influence is waning. Instead of exporting innovation, the U.S. is importing anxiety. Tariffs, trade wars, and sanctions are defensive mechanisms in a world where it no longer sets the pace. The end of the Musk era? Musk's meteoric rise represented a particularly American mythology, the genius billionaire entrepreneur who reshapes the world. But that myth is fraying. Tesla's struggles may foreshadow the limits of charisma, ambition, and media control in the face of real-world economic challenges. What comes next? The future of Tesla remains uncertain. It still has significant resources, brand loyalty, and technological infrastructure. But whether it can adapt to the new global reality is another question, adapting or fading. To survive, Tesla will need to drastically alter its strategy. That means lowering costs, improving quality, and recentering its mission. It also means reducing dependence on Musk's persona and investing in global partnerships, especially in regions where its influence is waning. A lesson for the West. Tesla's trajectory should serve as a wake-up call for U.S. policymakers. The era of dominance through innovation is over unless there is substantial reinvestment in domestic manufacturing, education, and infrastructure. Relying on a few tech giants and charismatic CEOs will no longer suffice. The broader battle for the future. The EV race is just one battlefield in a larger economic war. Control over semiconductors, AI, green energy, and digital infrastructure. Tesla's decline is not just a corporate setback, it's a signpost pointing toward a multipolar world where the U.S. must compete, not command. The United States has long defined itself as the champion of free markets and liberal democracy. From the post-World War II economic order shaped by the Bretton Woods institutions to the Washington Consensus of the 1990s, the U.S. has exported not only products but also ideas, chief among them the belief in global capitalism and open markets. But in the face of rising global competition, particularly from China, and the visible decline of U.S. industrial dominance, the nation's approach to global economics is shifting from competition to control. Rather than adapting and innovating, the U.S. is increasingly turning to sanctions, tariffs, and regulatory warfare as tools to suppress emerging economic rivals. This shift marks a fundamental contradiction. While continuing to preach free market values, the U.S. engages in behavior that undermines the very system it built. This chapter explores how this contradiction is playing out on the world stage and the consequences it carries. The sanctions economy, a tool of desperation. Sanctions were once the domain of last resort diplomacy, employed to isolate rogue regimes that posed threats to peace or engaged in human rights violations. Over the last 2 decades, however, sanctions have morphed into routine instruments of economic warfare, imposed not just against enemies, but also against strategic competitors. Consider Venezuela. The U.S. did not merely sanction the Maduro regime for alleged electoral fraud and human rights abuses. It went further, punishing third-party countries and companies that attempted to do business with Venezuela. This type of enforcement is called a secondary boycott, a strategy designed to isolate the target regime by instilling fear in its potential partners. The net result? Venezuela, though suffering economically, did not collapse. Instead, it forged closer ties with countries like China, Iran, Russia, and even Turkey, building a parallel trade network outside U.S. jurisdiction. Moreover, the sanctions served to consolidate Maduro's domestic support, enabling him to cast himself as a nationalist resisting foreign imperialism. The paradox of sanctions. This pattern, sanctions leading to tighter control, not regime change, has played out elsewhere. Cuba has endured U.S. sanctions since 1960 and still has a communist government. Iran, under crushing sanctions, has developed its own arms industry and maintained regional influence. North Korea, isolated since the Korean War, remains defiant, if impoverished. The sanctions economy backfires. Sanctions also hurt the U.S. economy. They reduce export opportunities for U.S. firms, cut off global supply chains, and incentivize the rise of alternative financial systems outside U.S. control. China and Russia have accelerated efforts to move away from the SWIFT payment system and trade in non-dollar currencies, a trend that threatens to erode the dollar's global dominance. Tariffs, anti-market tools in a free market mask. Tariffs are another instrument that contradicts the U.S.'s self-proclaimed devotion to free trade. Once used selectively to protect infant industries, they are now deployed as political tools to pressure allies and adversaries alike. Former President Donald Trump launched a global tariff war in the late 2010s. He imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum, justified under national security concerns, a flimsy pretext widely criticized by economists and trade partners. Canada, Mexico, the European Union, and China all faced U.S. tariffs. The result was retaliatory tariffs, higher consumer prices, and disrupted global supply chains. Farmers in the U.S. Midwest, key supporters of Trump, suffered dramatically as China cut agricultural imports, prompting the administration to issue emergency subsidies. It was, effectively, a government bailout for victims of the government's own policy. The irony of protectionism. Tariffs, once seen as an outdated relic of mercantilism, are now central to U.S. economic strategy. But they contradict decades of American-led trade liberalization. For over 70 years, U.S. policy advocated for reduced barriers, open markets, and the belief that competition makes economies stronger. Now, China, once demonized as a protectionist state, finds itself in the odd position of defending free trade in forums like the World Trade Organization, WTO. In contrast, the U.S. increasingly looks inward, skeptical of globalization and eager to weaponize its market power. The rise of weaponized interdependence. A 2019 academic paper by Henry Farrell and Abraham Newman introduced the term weaponized interdependence, the use of global networks controlled by dominant states to impose economic and strategic pressure. The U.S., which controls key nodes like the U.S. dollar, SWIFT, and major tech platforms, has employed this strategy aggressively. The U.S. forced European companies to halt business with Iran after reimposing sanctions, threatening massive fines and legal retaliation. The same tactic was used with Huawei, the Chinese tech giant, which was banned from accessing U.S. semiconductors, crippling its mobile phone business. This form of economic coercion sends a message to the world. Reliance on American technology, finance, or infrastructure comes with political strings attached. Global reaction: build alternative systems. In response, countries are building parallel systems. China has developed its own payment system, SIPS, as an alternative to SWIFT. Russia, after being cut off from international financial markets, began transacting in yuan, rupees, and even Bitcoin. BRICS nations are working toward a joint currency, potentially bypassing U.S. influence. What began as a strength, global interdependence, is turning into a weakness as countries seek strategic autonomy to protect themselves from U.S. pressure. The moral high ground is eroding. One of the most consequential impacts of the U.S. strategy shift is the erosion of moral leadership. Sanctions and tariffs are being applied inconsistently, often aligned with domestic political goals rather than clear ethical standards. For example, Saudi Arabia, despite its human rights abuses and involvement in the Yemen war, faces little meaningful sanction due to oil interests. India, though purchasing Russian oil and weapons, faces minimal backlash compared to smaller nations. Meanwhile, countries like Cuba and Venezuela, with limited global power, are punished relentlessly. This inconsistency undermines the U.S.'s claim to moral leadership. Nations increasingly see American economic policy not as principled, but as transactional, guided by convenience, not conviction. Domestic justifications, global consequences. Leaders often justify sanctions and tariffs in terms of national security, job protection, or anti-corruption campaigns. But these justifications mask deeper insecurities, the fear that America can no longer win in a fair global market. This strategy might win short-term political points, especially in election seasons, but it leads to long-term decline. Allies lose trust, unsure if trade agreements will be honored. Corporations hedge their bets, diversifying away from the U.S. Foreign investors retreat, wary of unpredictable policy shifts. Tariffs and sanctions thus become tools of self-sabotage, weakening the very pillars of American power: reliability, transparency, and rule-based trade. What competition could look like instead? Rather than resorting to blunt instruments of coercion, the U.S. could reclaim leadership by competing strategically, investing in infrastructure, education, and technology, supporting small businesses and startups to drive innovation, modernizing labor laws and supporting the workforce for a digital economy, forming true multilateral partnerships rather than transactional alliances. China's rise is not just a threat, it's a wake-up call. It proves that efficient production, long-term planning, and strategic investment yield results. The U.S. can compete, but only if it stops trying to rig the game, the contradiction at the core. Tariffs have long been a contentious issue in global economics. In the United States, a nation that has historically championed free markets, open competition, and global trade liberalization, the modern turn toward protectionism through tariffs represents a glaring contradiction, one that is not just ideological, but deeply structural. As the U.S. increasingly uses tariffs as blunt instruments of control, it has inadvertently exposed a level of hypocrisy that is reshaping the global economic landscape. For decades, the U.S. promoted the Washington Consensus, urging developing nations to embrace free markets, eliminate subsidies, and reduce trade barriers. This was the ideological cornerstone of globalization. Yet, today, when the same market forces benefit competitors like China, Vietnam, or even Mexico, the U.S. retreats into protectionism, undermining its own economic philosophy. This contradiction not only damages the country's credibility, but also risks triggering long-term structural consequences for both the American economy and its global standing. A brief history of U.S. trade policy, from liberalization to retrenchment. In the post-World War II era, U.S. trade policy focused on creating a global system of open markets. This effort birthed institutions like the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, which later evolved into the World Trade Organization, WTO. The logic was straightforward. By opening up markets, fostering interdependence, and ensuring equal treatment under law, countries would not only become richer, but more stable and peaceful. During the Cold War, this economic liberalism became a strategic weapon. Trade was used to bind allies together and create a capitalist bloc opposed to the Soviet Union. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and West Germany flourished under this model, often with U.S. support, even as they ran trade surpluses with America. Yet starting in the late 20th century, cracks began to show. The rise of China and the relocation of manufacturing to low-wage economies. started to erode America's industrial base. Many Americans blame trade liberalization for job losses, wage stagnation, and the hollowing out of entire regions, the so-called Rust Belt. Politically, this shift paved the way for a more nationalist, protectionist stance, culminating in Donald Trump's presidency. Under Trump, the U.S. imposed tariffs on a wide range of countries and goods: steel, aluminum, electronics, automobiles, not just targeting China, but also traditional allies like Canada and the European Union. Even after Trump left office, the Biden administration retained many of these tariffs, signaling that protectionism had bipartisan support. Today, tariffs are no longer fringe policy. They are part of the economic mainstream. The free market hypocrisy. The fundamental hypocrisy lies in the contrast between rhetoric and reality. On paper, the U.S. still preaches the virtues of the free market: efficiency, innovation, competition. But in practice, it has turned to tariffs, tools that are, by definition, anti-market. They distort prices, pick winners and losers, and shield domestic industries from global competition. This contradiction is not lost on the rest of the world. When China uses industrial subsidies or strategic trade policy to support its industries, the U.S. accuses it of cheating or manipulation. Yet when the U.S. does the same, it's framed as defending national security or restoring fairness. The double standard is stark and corrosive. Tariffs on Chinese EVs, for example, are not about safety or ethics. They are about blocking competition. Chinese automakers like BYD are simply producing better vehicles at lower prices. This is the outcome the free market is supposed to reward. Instead, the U.S. is using tariffs to punish efficiency and protect domestic inefficiency. This goes beyond just cars. Solar panels, steel, microchips, pharmaceuticals, all are areas where foreign competitors, often supported by state policies, have outperformed U.S. firms. But instead of investing in competitiveness through research, infrastructure, or education, the U.S. resorts to punitive measures. In doing so, it betrays the very principles it has spent decades imposing on others.